When it comes to ghosts, I am somewhat of a skeptic. However, just because I don't believe in the paranormal in real life does not mean that I cannot be scared by the concept of a ghost. Whether it's a book, a movie, or a video game, I am more than capable of suspending my disbeliefs and being absolutely terrified by the ghostly activity on display. Being a fantasy series, The Legend of Zelda is also no stranger to the supernatural. Be it the spirits of the deceased, demons, the living dead, shadow people, or anything else not found in the real world, Zelda has it all. So today let's go over some of the most haunted locations in the franchise. And when I say haunted, I'm specifically talking about ghosts, apparitions, spirits, specters, whatever you want to call them. The souls of the dead who continue to linger for one reason or another. In other words, no zombies, vampires, or mummies, or con artists, that kind of stuff. So without further delay, here are my picks for the most haunted locations in The Legend of Zelda. Starting off with the new kid on the block, Echoes of Wisdom overall isn't exactly rife with spooky content. I mean, even the read-ads look kinda cute in this art style, I'm not gonna lie. Now, without spoiling too much, I will say that the antagonist does have some very unnerving and almost Lovecraftian characteristics. In fact, I would argue that it's probably one of the scariest Zelda villains to date, but that's a story for another video. That said, there is one location that has a pretty haunting and mysterious quality to it as well, which is the cemetery right next to the sanctuary. Here we can find a Hylian woman who explains that her grandfather is buried here, and that back when he was alive, he claimed to have discovered a secret staircase that leads into one of the graves here. She also mentions something about a stuffed toy her grandfather brought into the grave with him when he went exploring. A toy which was allegedly stolen away by a ghost. And well, turns out that the old man was telling the truth. One of the tombstones, which is considerably bigger than the other graves, does indeed have a stairwell hidden underneath it, granting access to a relatively large crypt of sorts. This underground burial site is absolutely crawling with ghosts, also known as guineas, including a much bigger variant known as a guinea level 2. It's easily one of the most haunted burial chambers in the series, and one can only wonder how many people were ultimately buried here, and why their restless souls still linger to this day. Even more interesting is that the so-called stuffed toy the grandfather is said to have brought with him when he explored this place can also be found here, and as it turns out, it's a teddy bear. Strangely enough, the bear has a unique effect on guineas specifically in that they seem to be completely obsessed with it. When placed in their vicinity, they will gather around it like moths to a flame, giving you the opportunity to walk right by or get some free hits in. Just make sure you don't use a guinea of your own, because the teddy bear has the same effect on them as well. In that sense, it's very similar to the meat echo and its effect on moblins, for example. A temporary distraction, in this case for ghosts. Now, there is actually some in-game lore that explains this phenomena. The guinea echo description states that these wandering souls are eternally lonely and have the unfortunate tendency to lick potential friends, which is actually kinda sad. Unlike many other enemies, the guinea are not out to kill you, at least not on purpose. They simply see you as a potential companion, which has the unfortunate side effect of draining your life force. This is likely why the teddy bear draws their attention. It seems to fool them into thinking it's yet another friend they can attach themselves to. Again, pretty sad if you think about it. One last thing to mention is that there's actually another enemy who has a unique reaction to the bear, namely the Goo Spectre, which also happens to be a ghost type enemy just like the guinea. However, instead of cherishing it, the Goo Spectre goes out of its way to destroy it, which is kinda interesting. I've experimented with a lot of different echoes, including some other ghost types like Pose and Moa, but none of them seem the least bit interested in the teddy bear. All except the Goo Spectre, who consistently goes after it with a vengeance. So yeah, while Echoes of Wisdom is pretty tame in terms of spooks and scares, the Sanctuary's haunted grave is definitely a paranormal hotspot. Factor in a creepy stuffed animal that attracts the spirits of the dead, and I think it's a worthy addition to the list of Hyrule's most haunted. And since we're on the topic of graveyards, haunted graveyards have become quite the staple in Zelda. If there's some kind of burial site present in the game, you can bet your sweet EMF meter that some ghostly activity is going on there. Of course, there are a lot to choose from. The one from A Link to the Past, the iconic graveyard from Ocarina of Time, Ikana Graveyard, Yol Graveyard from Oracle of Ages, the list goes on. But I had to give it to the OG graveyard from the first game. Not because it's the most scary, I mean, obviously not, but in terms of sheer numbers, this 8-bit graveyard definitely takes the cake. Because with the exception of one grave which hides a cave with an old man, which seems to be a bit of a pattern in these games, every single grave here will release a vengeful spirit if Link disturbs disturbs it. Even just brushing up against a tombstone by accident is enough to start a haunting. It's a good thing this kind of stuff doesn't happen in real life, because I don't think anyone would attend a funeral ever again.
But from ashes to ashes, and from dust to dust.
Oh shit, oh, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, everyone. Moving away from graveyards and burial sites for a bit, next on the list is Ocarina of Time's Hyrule Field. If it's not skeletal remains springing up from the ground and attacking the living, it's ghosts, also known as Big Poes, plaguing unsuspecting travelers. Yeah, Hyrule Field is not exactly a place to go for a nice and peaceful stroll. What exactly caused the field to become so tainted by the paranormal is unknown, as neither the game nor the books explain this unusual activity. Some theorize that it may have been the site of a massive battle, like the brutal and bloody Hyrule Civil War, and that these are the restless remains of fallen warriors who continue to haunt these hypothetical battlegrounds after dark. As for the ghosts and their sudden appearance on Hyrule Field, we can also only guess. But since they only show up 7 years in the future, maybe they are victims of Ganondorf's takeover, who knows. Whatever the case may be, they apparently make for a good business venture for certain individuals. There are parts of Zelda 2's lore that are a little outdated and, dare I say, incompatible with the canon we know today, which, let's be fair, is mostly due to its age. That being said, it did introduce some ideas and concepts that would be adapted by later titles, like the existence of a third Triforce piece, or the idea of a crest appearing on the back of the hero's hand, even Dark Link, and perhaps most famously, the towns and villages, which are all named after characters that would appear more than a decade later in Ocarina of Time. And most notably, of course, the sages. Oh, and Mido for some reason. That is, all except one, the town of Kasuto, which is speculated to be named after a sage we've never seen before. The game features two versions of this settlement, the deserted town of Kasuto, or Old Kasuto, and another secret settlement known as the Hidden Town of Kasuto, which I will refer to as New Kasuto for the sake of convenience. We learn that at some point before Link's adventure kicks off, Old Kasuto came under siege by monsters, forcing its inhabitants to abandon their homes and flee east towards the coastline. Here they would establish a new town with the same name, hidden away inside the forest. Old Kasuto is referred to as a dead town, and with the exception of one ballsy old man, the place is completely devoid of life, giving rise to the first ghost town ever seen in the series. And when I say ghost town, I mean that quite literally, because despite the absence of people, Old Kasuto does have something else inhabiting it, something that doesn't reveal itself until later. When you attempt to explore the abandoned village for the first time, Link will suddenly start taking damage for seemingly no reason, and without a guide telling you what's going on, I can only imagine the confusion some kids must have felt back in '87. Turns out Old Kasuto is entirely inhabited by ghost-like entities, also known as Moa. More specifically, the blue variant of the Moa, which are completely invisible unless you're in possession of the magic cross, an item which can only be obtained from a hidden dungeon nearby. In that sense, the cross is sort of a precursor to the Lens of Truth in a way, an artifact capable of revealing things that are invisible to the naked eye. Now, as far as I know, it's never really explained why this town in particular came under attack while the other settlements remained safe, though it is worth mentioning that Old Kasuto is located close to a massive graveyard, which could be where the Moa originated from. So I don't know, maybe one of the townsfolk accidentally bumped into a gravestone and started the ghost-pocalypse or something. Either way, as the first ghost town in the series, both literally and figuratively, Kasuto is definitely a worthy entry on today's list. Next up, we have one of the greatest icons of Hylian culture and architecture, Hyrule Castle. While the castle has posed a fair share of dangers and challenges to overcome in other entries, it's never really been a place known for being haunted. Corrupted knights, sure. Traps and monsters of all shapes and sizes, absolutely. But ghosts? Not so much. At least not that I can think of. However, the same cannot be said about the castle in Twilight Princess. Here, it's actually one of the most haunted locations in the entire game. And we're not even talking about your typical ghost enemies like Pose, Ginny or Moa. No, these ghosts are different. For reasons unknown, this Hyrule Castle is rife with the spirits of what seem to be former Hylian soldiers. Not to be confused with these guys, you know, the ones you meet at the beginning. These soldiers are very much alive and are simply trapped in another dimension. The ones I'm talking about are most definitely deceased, and one look at them up close confirms as much. From the glowing eyes to their zombie-like appearance, these guys have been dead for quite a while, I would assume. In fact, aesthetically they have a lot in common with the hero Shade, aka Link from Ocarina of Time, who is also confirmed to have passed away. There are two paranormal hotspots where these ghost soldiers are known to show up. A room inside the castle's interior and a small cemetery in the castle courtyard. The ones inside the castle will point out a safe passage across a series of platforms, some of which will fall down if Link steps on them. The ones in the cemetery will clue you in on the solution to a puzzle. There's a small group near a pedestal where you're supposed to place an owl statue, and another ensemble is standing in a circle near a tree and will point to a spot on the floor where you find a secret switch. These ghosts in particular are also connected to a character only known as the Cursed Swordsman, who is said to be buried near a sacred tree in this very graveyard. Once again, it's unknown why these former soldiers are haunting the castle, but given the fact that they provide help to the hero as opposed to being hostile, the implications might be similar to that of the hero Shade. In fact, many people, including myself, believe that the so-called Cursed Swordsman is likely referring to the hero Shade himself, who is indeed cursed in a way, stuck in the mortal realm until he can pass on his knowledge to a new hero. If Ocarina of Time Link was a decorated soldier, which he definitely seems to have been, it only makes sense that they would have buried him at the castle. As such, the other ghosts we see could be the knights he commanded while serving in the Hylian army, and they too are unable to move on until Hyrule has been freed from the clutches of Ganondorf. The locations we've discussed so far have, in large part, earned their spot on the list due to the sheer number of ghosts that inhabit them. But this is not the case with the Knights Academy from Skyward Sword. Here, it's not the number of ghosts present, but rather the severity of the haunting. In fact, it might be the only example where a ghost actually attaches itself to an individual for an extended period of time, causing both physical and mental distress. Now, I'm not gonna go too deep into it here since I already made a video about this very subject in great detail, but in a nutshell, the Knights Academy is home to a female poltergeist only known as Feeny. She initially haunts the school bathroom on the first floor, where she can be heard making some rather unsettling sounds. Unsurprisingly, the supernatural cries and moans don't go unnoticed for very long, and quickly catch the attention of some of the students as well as the school staff, none of which know what exactly is going on. When Link enters the bathroom after dark, the source of the creepy sounds makes itself known in the form of a creepy, ghostly hand reaching out from the toilet bowl, and for whatever reason is begging for paper. I guess even ghosts need to wipe once in a while. Now, around the same time the haunting at the academy starts, a side quest will present itself, one in which a student named Colin wants you to deliver a love letter on his behalf. From this moment on, you have a choice. Either you do as instructed and present the letter to Colin's crush, or you can give the letter to Feeny instead. If you choose the second option, it'll cause Feeny to fall in love with Colin. And in what is perhaps one of the cruelest fates ever seen in a Zelda game, she latches herself onto him, caressing him in his sleep and uttering words of affection night after night, which perhaps unintentionally leads to Colin having horrible nightmares, possibly for the rest of his life. Again, if you want to see a more in-depth coverage of this, including my own theories and speculation, I highly recommend watching my Curious Case of Skyloft video. But for now, I will say that this is definitely one of the most chilling hauntings in the franchise. The Forest Temple is one of my favorite dungeons in any Zelda game thus far, and it just so happens to feature some prominent paranormal activity as well. In fact, it's part of its central mechanic. As you set foot inside the dungeon proper, 4 ghosts will manifest, each of which will steal a flame from one of 4 torches and takes off with it. This will prompt the elevator in the center to deactivate, which is the only way to reach the boss. As such, the goal is to hunt down all 4 ghosts, recover their stolen flame, and bring back power to the elevator. So, who are these ghosts? Well, unlike the conventional pose in the game, these 4 actually have names: Joelle, Beth, Amy, and Meg, which is actually a reference to the 4 main characters from a novel called Little Women, published in 1868. Collectively, they are known as the Poe sisters, and their backstory has been theorized about ever since Ocarina of Time came out. What we do know for sure is that they are siblings, and that back when they were alive, they were women of nobility, priestesses who allegedly lived and worshipped at the Forest Temple before it fell into ruin. Interestingly enough, they also appear in Majora's Mask, under the same names no less, and here we even learn which order the sisters were born in, with Amy being the youngest, then Joelle, Beth, and finally Meg as the oldest. Of course, we do have to keep in mind that by all accounts these are different characters from a parallel dimension, so this knowledge may not apply to the ones from Ocarina. And that's about all we know about the Poe sisters. Everything else is conjecture. We don't know how they died or when, or why their spirits rose from the grave to begin with. Though there are of course plenty of theories. Some suggest that the Forest Temple, which has all the characteristics of a stronghold, may have come under siege, at which point its occupants destroyed the only staircase leading into it, possibly as an attempt to delay the invading force. However, given its current state, we can assume that it didn't keep the temple safe indefinitely, and it and its inhabitants eventually succumbed to whoever or whatever came knocking at the door. Whatever the case, something terrible must have happened at the Forest Temple to cause its former host to linger here even in death, because according to the lore, Poes are known to haunt the mortal realm due to strong feelings of rage and hatred. Speaking of which, if we're gonna talk about the Forest Temple, we have to include the Arbiters Grounds as well, because the two dungeons have quite a lot in common. The first half of the Arbiters Grounds is very much identical to the Forest Temple in terms of its central mechanic: 4 torches, 4 ghosts. Though these ghosts are a little more disturbing than the Poe sisters, I would say. They take on the shape of a very tall zombie-like figure wearing a cloak of sorts, a bit like a wraith or a dementor. As far as the lore goes, we know even less about these guys. No names, no origin story, nothing. But since we're on the topic of dementors, it could be that they served a similar role. After all, the Arbiters Grounds served as a prison and execution site. I mean, what better way to prevent inmates from escaping than to use a bunch of undead monstrosities to serve as prison guards? Though it is also possible that they were still living people back when they served the prison. 9-foot tall people, that is. Other theories suggest that they may have been executioners, or maybe were prisoners themselves. It's all up in the air, really. But personally, I do prefer the idea of a Dementor-like prison guard. Oh, and aside from the 4 main ghosts, there's also an abundance of rodents who apparently also decided to hang out at the prison after death, tormenting unsuspecting visitors by piling up on them and weighing them down. Why or how a ghost even has weight is anyone's guess, but it sure is annoying. All in all, I think the Arbiters Grounds are just as worthy of a spot on the list as the Forest Temple is. Its 4 ghosts may be a bit more vague and ambiguous than the Poe sisters, but their creepy aesthetics more than make up for it. Not to be confused with the ghost ship from the Wind Waker, which only consists of 1 small room, the haunted vessel from Phantom Hourglass is definitely on a whole nother level. Not only is it massive, it's also home to some very dangerous and unsettling enemies, like the Reaplings, which are these Grim Reaper type enemies who patrol the ship's interior and who are basically immortal. They can be avoided or stunned, but they cannot be killed. On top of that, they can also move and see through walls and will deal 2 hearts of damage, which is double the attack power of that of a regular phantom. You also gotta love the localization for these guys. In Japanese they're called Hell Dead, which is just hardcore, and in French their name translates to Damned Soul. As for the Germans, they just call it Zombie. Very creative. However, by far the creepiest thing on this entire ship are these quote-unquote little girls. Right off the bat, you know there's something wrong with them. I mean, come on. The creepy smile, the soulless black eyes, they ain't fooling anyone. Unfortunately, you are forced to go along with their little charade, and once you bring all 4 of them to safety, they will show their true form, which funnily enough is actually less scary than their disguise. On top of all that, the entire ship itself is also closely tied to Bellum, which is arguably one of the creepiest Zelda villains in the franchise, capable of consuming the soul of any living being, leaving nothing more than an empty husk. This next one kinda speaks for itself, I would say. The Earth Temple is basically Poe Central, who not only deal damage in this game, but can even possess you temporarily, rendering its host dazed and confused, which is honestly kind of a disturbing thought. The idea that these beings enter your body and mess with your mind and motor functions. Safe to say this underground sanctum is absolutely crawling with these entities, even more so if you factor in the final boss, Jalhalla, which is the culmination of dozens of Poes merging together into one giant ball of ectoplasm. How the temple came to be so haunted is never touched upon, but it definitely fits the idea of an old abandoned crypt deep underground. Yes, it is technically a temple, i.e. a place of worship, but the many stone coffins definitely suggest that it served as some sort of burial site also. Besides that, I don't really have much to say about this place, other than the music is cool and probably one of my favorite ambient dungeon tracks. But if you want to know more, I can recommend watching The Lore of the Dungeons Wind Waker Edition by Bandit, which is a collaborative miniseries featuring many different Zelda creators, in this case with the man himself, Zeltik. And speaking of Zeltik, he made a video all about redeads, which includes a significant section about the Earth Temple as well, so go check it out. Yeah, I think you saw this one coming from a mile away. The bottom of the well and the Shadow Temple, which I will treat as a pair. In fact, it's theorized that the two may have been connected and part of the same structure at one point, given their similar aesthetics and architecture. I'm gonna be honest, I almost didn't include these two on the list, because first of all, it's become a bit of a cliche at this point, you know? You mentioned creepy locations in Zelda, and the well and Shadow Temple are guaranteed to top the list, for good reasons of course. Secondly, though they are definitely one of the most disturbing places in the series to date, my reasoning was that they're actually pretty light on ghost activity. I mean, in terms of enemies, the vast majority fall more or less in the undead corpse category, which I already mentioned is not the main focus for today's list. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that they absolutely fit the bill, and I was just making excuses not to include them. As one of my Discord members pointed out to me, Bongo Bongo himself is most definitely a ghost-like entity, and one of the most dangerous and destructive ones at that. He also haunts both areas, starting with the well where he was imprisoned, and then moving to the Shadow Temple after he escapes. Aside from that, and I'm embarrassed that I didn't even consider this sooner, but even though we don't visually see a lot of ghosts besides Bongo Bongo, it's pretty evident that there's a lot of restless spirits trapped inside these walls. In fact, they speak to you on several occasions, and in one instance when you're riding the ferry to the last area, you can see a whole bunch of spirits ominously drifting by. So yes, the bottom of the well and the Shadow Temple are without a doubt one of the most active ghost sites ever conceived in The Legend of Zelda, and have earned their spot on the list 10 times over. You probably saw this one coming as well. However, unlike the well and the Shadow Temple, Iana was never off the table for me. It is by far one of the most haunted locations in the series, so much so that it's home to a paranormal investigator who studies the area for this very reason. Sure, just like the previous entry, it does feature a lot of undead enemies, like Gibdo, Redeads, Stell Children, and Stelfos. Though in the case of the last two, they are both resurrected skeletons and ghosts at the same time. The ghosts of royalty and their loyal soldiers who once commanded a powerful kingdom the region is named after. The Kingdom of Iana, which fell into ruin a long time ago. Unlike the conventional style enemies, they're not mindless heaps of resurrected bones. They still maintain their intelligence and personalities, and will continue to fulfill their duties, almost as if time stood still for them and the kingdom is still in its prime. We also meet the two composer brothers, Flat and Sharp, who are former servants of the Old Kingdom and continue to haunt Iana as well. And of course, the Poe Collector and the Poe sisters mentioned previously also make this place their home. And last but certainly not least, we have the Garrow, the spirits of long-dead ninjas who were once at war with the Kingdom of Iana. In fact, it's believed that this very conflict, which was long, bloody, and ultimately undecided, is what led to the kingdom's downfall. And now, countless years later, the battle still rages on. Not in life, but in death. So far we've talked about haunted graveyards, buildings, a moving vessel, even an entire province. So I think it's only fitting that we end with the biggest haunted location by far. An entire subterranean world. A world of the dead, if you will. While the depths show signs of several types of activity, some of which concerns the living like housing, mining, entertainment, and so on, it's heavily implied that the main function of the depths is to serve as a temporary home for spirits, a kind of supernatural terminal from which the souls of the deceased will eventually travel to the afterlife, wherever or whatever that may be. The depths are absolutely littered with lost souls, not just in the form of Poes, but also these shadow ghosts who are implied to be soldiers who lost their life during the calamity from Breath of the Wild, as they mainly reside beneath memorial sites on the surface. Spearheading this whole operation are massive talking statues known as the Bargainers, whose main purpose is to guide these lost souls to the afterlife without passing judgment. I could go on and on about this place, but I actually already made a whole video about the lore implications of the depths, in particular its striking similarity to the Japanese underworld of Yomi. And not to toot my own horn too much, but the video has since become more relevant because, as it turns out, Tears of the Kingdom Masterworks actually confirms that the depths were indeed inspired by the Shinto underworld, which is a very cool piece of confirmation. I can also recommend 2 more videos, one from Moxie Watts and one from NintendoBlackCrisis, both of which are deep dives into Tears of the Kingdom's underworld, like the mythology surrounding the Bargainer statues, for example. So go check it out if you're interested. And that concludes my list of the most haunted locations in Zelda. If you feel like I've missed anything or have your own list to share, I look forward to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, thank you to my Patreons and channel members, and I hope to see you all next time.